Hello and welcome to Diminishing Returns, the show where we discuss a film and then pitch our own ideas for the sequel. Today we're going back to 2008. It was a much simpler time for superhero films, when the notion of pitching a sequel that was essentially a completely different standalone story set within the same universe would have been absurd. With that in mind, I hope you enjoy what we've conjured up for you.
Hello, I'm Calvin.
I'm Alan.
I'm Sol.
And today, in preparation for the latest Marvel release, Doctor Strange, we're going to be going back to the very first installment of this cinematic universe, 2008's Iron Man. So normally when we start these discussions, we all sort of talk about how much familiarity we have with the film we're talking about, or the series, and how we first came to it. So, Sol, I have a feeling that you're going to be the most Marvel fanboy out of the three of us. Would you agree?
Yeah, I expect so. I know Alan won't like them at all, and you probably just kind of think they're not as good as X-Men.
Yeah, that's startlingly accurate. Okay.
What's Doctor Strange? I mean, I genuinely don't know what it is, but where does it fit into the world of Marvel? It's not that funny. All right, let me tell you what I've seen, right? I've seen the Iron Man films. I've seen the Avengers. I haven't seen the one with the raccoon in it.
Oh, Guardians of the Galaxy.
You're forgetting, Alan, I know you've seen Thor. I know you've seen Captain America, or at least half of it when I was watching it. I remember you commenting that it was painfully transparent or something.
That's definitely Alan.
I think you've seen The Incredible Hulk.
I've seen Hulks, yeah. I think I've seen all the Hulk.
What?
There's only one that's like part of this world, the Ed Norton one.
Yeah, I've seen that. Don't Make Me Hungry. That's the one.
Is there another? Oh, Ant-Man. I doubt you've seen that.
I haven't seen that, no.
Yeah. That's the only Marvel film that I've not
skipped
seen.
A lot of the sequels. Oh, it's well, in my opinion, it's one of the best. For the general consensus is that it isn't. So,
what's Doctor Strange then? How does that fit in?
He's part of this new wave of characters that they're introducing now that they've established and proven that they can be a little bit more ambitious and less conventional, and people will still go along with it. He is a magician, essentially. I'm not hugely familiar with Doctor Strange. I've read a few issues of comics where he's appeared and what have you, but I've never read a Doctor Strange comic specifically or seen any of the. I think they made an animated film at one point, straight to video. So I'm not the most clued up.
Is this where they've run out of the main characters that people have heard of? So now they're starting to get further and further in.
They ran out from the get-go with Iron Man in 2008, Alan.
Yeah, was that? I was thinking of this earlier, actually, because I was reading something that said Iron Man wasn't particularly one of the better-known characters.
Yeah, he wasn't.
Obviously, I've got no context for that because I don't know any of them. But was Iron Man a well-known character before the film? Or
not at all, no. Before the recent wave of superhero films, back when a superhero parody in a cartoon meant that you did the Batman theme would play and Bam would appear on screen when someone got punched.
Yeah. Back
in that era, people knew Batman, Superman, Spider-Man, The Incredible Hulk, and maybe Wolverine. They were your A-list superheroes, and Marvel had made the arguably short-sighted decision to sell off the film rights to all of their characters to other studios. So Spider-Man was Sony. I think they had the likes of Ghost Rider and Punisher.
Spider-Man was technically MGM originally, and only ended up with Sony. And I know this is another bit of Bond history that is going to come in here, but there was some kind of legal dispute it's the legal dispute that brought about the unofficial Bond films Casino Royale and Never Say Never Again, and Sony had rights to a certain aspect of the Bond series And so they basically traded, because MGM wanted the Bond rights back, and Sony were like, oh, okay, well, we'll give you that if you give us Spider-Man, which was perhaps not the best decision to say that Sony ended up releasing pretty much all the Daniel Craig Bond movies and have quite a big stake in the Bond series now. Sorry, continue.
No, it's fine. Sony had Spider-Man, Punisher, Ghost Rider. They might have had some others, but all of their rights have since expired, other than Spider-Man, who they've held on to by pumping out a film every few years, regardless of quality. Fox did the same thing with Fantastic Four. They famously produced the 1994 Fantastic Four film. I don't know if you've seen it, either of you.
Yes, the Roger Corman produced.
Yeah. Which was made for $1 million, I think, just purely so they could keep the copyright.
I don't think it was ever actually intended to be released, was it? It was just, and I think even now it's.
I don't think it's ever been officially released. It's only available, as far as I know, on bootleg copies that are now passed around on the internet.
This is becoming a thing now, isn't it? The rights situation, and like you say, pumping out films, regardless of their quality, just to maintain rights. Is that? So I guess that's basically you own the rights, but you have to be doing something with them, otherwise it.
Typically, I think the deals they make say something like, if you don't make a film with the character using this, license, then the rights revert back to the original owner. If you don't do it within 10 years or 5 years or something.
So is that what people build into their contracts as a safety clause to make sure no one just sort of sits on their property and stops them from using it?
I think so. And all of Marvel's main characters were sold off at various studios. Hulk was at Universal, I think, or it might have been a split deal with Universal and another company. I can't quite remember how that one works. And because I think Hulk still has a few rights owned by another company now still.
I think that's one of the reasons why he hasn't had another solo movie.
Yeah, it is.
The first one.
Oh yeah, X-Men is at Fox, and so's Fantastic Four.
Yes.
And they had someone else. Did they have Daredevil? But that's since reverted back to Marvel,
I think so.
Well.
They had Daredevil and Elektra.
Yeah, all their character rights were dotted around. They'd sold off all the, A-listers other than the Incredible Hulk. Marvel had sold off all of their proper characters that, people wouldn't just laugh about for being crap, but they still saw the value, I guess, in, the gimmick of a crossover. And I mean, what they do in the comics, and part of why the comics are so popular, is that they have this shared continuity, and it's massively successful there. So all it took was, I'm going to assume it was Kevin Feige, is he called?
Feige? Is it Feige?
Feige? I'm not sure.
I don't know.
Feige. However you pronounce it, the producer who's behind the whole Marvel cinematic universe, who sort of, saw the value in, well, let's just make 4 movies about our lesser-known characters. We know that there's potential for these guys to make good movies because, we believe in the strength of them as characters just because they're not particularly well-known. We'll throw the Incredible Hulk in there because that one is well-known to kind of sell it a bit better, but the others are lesser-known people, and then we'll have it gear up building towards this big crossover epic, the Avengers, and by the time we get there, it'll be huge. And the gamble paid off.
Because it really was a big gamble, especially when you consider what the superhero movie space was like in 2008. Because I mean, at the time, what was there? There was the X-Men series, which was quite successful. Dark Knight hadn't come out yet.
X-Men and Spider-Man, basically.
Yeah.
Oh, Batman Begins was out before Iron Man, though.
Yeah, but Dark Knight wasn't quite out yet, and that was the one that sort of made that particular era of Batman. But now they're making superhero movies out of Squirrel Girl, who is an actual Marvel character. And it's really weird to think that, actually back then there were flops like Daredevil and Elektra and
Howard the Duck.
Exactly, whereas now it's there's a new superhero movie out every month, and it's a Marvel one, probably.
When did that Fantastic Four film come out? The first real one?
Oh, that was 2005.
2005, yeah.
But no one really liked it, did they?
That was dreadful.
That's what I mean. I mean, there'd been the big successes, but there'd been the big flops as well.
Yeah.
Part of it was Marvel Studios is, it's an offshoot of the company that makes all the comics, and therefore they had creative control over their characters when they made their own movies. So you suddenly weren't seeing these studio executives who didn't have a clue what they were doing with the characters kind of telling Kevin Smith to write a battle with a spider every 10 pages and put that into the film. They made them with utter respect for the characters and what made them work. And you can see that, it's... I think Marvel have been very clever with regards to their business practices. And, they've had a lot of criticism for lowballing their, pay for actors and not being afraid to recast actors as well. But even that, it's ushered in a new era of Hollywood filmmaking in a lot of ways, because now we do live in a world where the power of an actor isn't really what it used to be. The character is what sells a film.
Yeah. Did you just say that they've been criticised for not paying the actors enough?
Yeah.
By who? The actors? Does anybody else think that Hollywood actors are underpaid? Is that what people are worried about in the world?
I think now they're quite handsomely paid. Like I think Robert Downey
now
Jr.
they are. Yeah, it was. Robert Downey Jr. is an exception to the rule as well. He kind of had it built into all his contracts that like each successive film gives him like incredible, like multiplies the amounts that he had before, and then it came to renegotiating his contract as well. And obviously when he was signing a new one, he was getting obscene amounts of money. But I'm talking about the likes of who was it? Was it Terrence Howard in Iron Man?
Yes.
Yeah. He asked for more money, and they said, "Well, fuck you then." And
he got paid more for Iron Man than Robert Downey Jr. did for the very first one. And
that's it. They signed him on.
For the second one, he wanted his name next up to Robert Downey Jr.'s on the poster, and equal pay and billing. And they're sort of like, nah, you're not that important.
Yeah, and fair enough.
Yeah,
you're like, I'd just love to have been that meeting where they're going, you're Terrence Howard, right? Like, who the fuck do you think you are? Like, Robert Downey Jr. goes into that and says, look, I'm not going to do it anymore unless you pay me this. They got to pay it because he makes that film. Terrence Howard, it's just like, well, I've got fucking Don Cheadle's number in my phone. Like, what do you want from me?
Yes, quite.
Like, what do you think you're bringing to this that is so irreplaceable?
Isn't he an Oscar winner?
He's also in Big Mama's House.
Exactly, it's diversity. My understanding is they hired him very early on before they'd kind of figured out exactly what they were doing, and his deal wasn't really in line with what everyone else was getting. And then when it came time to the sequel, they were like, well, come on, don't be silly now. But, Ed Norton's another one. They weren't remotely concerned with getting rid of him and bringing on Mark Ruffalo as Hulk. And, that's caused them a little bit of a headache with regards to a lot of people not quite understanding that Ed Norton film is part of the continuity. But even though Robert Downey Jr. turns up as Tony Stark at the end, and
John Hurt reappears later on. He plays the same character in another film down the line.
It's still contested by some people whether or not it's part of that world, even though it clearly is.
This is probably quite a good segue, talking about the actors, to talk about Iron Man specifically as the first film in this universe. Because we talked about a gamble earlier on. Was casting Robert Downey Jr. as the lead in this something of a gamble, do you think, at the time?
Yes, absolutely. Again, he was not a bankable, like, A-lister at the time.
He wasn't
had his
an
fall from
A-lister.
grace. I mean, he was a well-known, he was a household name, but he was kind of a joke. In fact, in the Ultimates, which is a more recent run of Avengers comics, there's a scene where they're all sat around discussing who would play them in the film that's going to be made based on, the inevitable action exploits that they're going to get into, like with this end of the world scenario coming up. And someone suggests Robert Downey Jr. for, I think it's for Tony Stark. Might have been for another character. Someone suggests Robert Downey Jr. and then the other character's like, what, that bloody drughead? No way, I can do better than that.
Wow.
And this was published in like 1999, 2000, something like that. And then, if I recall correctly, Tony Stark's like, no, you've got to have Johnny Depp playing me. Come on. And this was the run of comics where Nick Fury was drawn to look like Samuel L. Jackson, and that whole sequence ends with them going, well, who's going to play you? And he's like, oh, come on. It's got to be Samuel L. Jackson. And then...
Because Morgan Freeman.
Yeah.
I'll tell you the link between the sort of slightly laughable drug addict Robert Downey Jr. and the reinvigorated Tony Stark is Kiss Kiss Bang Bang. That
you're right.
is where you see that side, and I think that film was much more successful than I expected it to be because of that personality. And then
it's something Marvel's done a lot of, is this kind of investing in talent, as it were. They're very good at scouting. It goes back to them not really liking to spend much money. They certainly, with their writers and directors and people, they're very good at sort of going, well, here's a fairly untested director in terms of making a huge action blockbuster, but we've gone to see their little indie film that they made that kind of encapsulates the right tone that we want. And I mean, I remember the amount of online abuse the Russo brothers were having sent their way when they were announced as the directors of Captain America, the Winter Soldier. And I was right behind it because, I've seen their work on stuff like Community, and they're clearly very capable directors. But if you hadn't watched Community and you just see, they've done a few episodes of a TV show, then you might think, well, how are they going to handle a film of this scale? But then, the two Captain America films they've done have gone down so well that they've been locked down to take over from Joss Whedon for the Avengers films coming up. And the same's true of James Gunn, who they hired to make Guardians of the Galaxy off the back of a run of very low-budget, dark, offbeat films. I personally think Super, his film, is an absolute masterpiece, but it's not a particularly commercial, mainstream friendly film. So again, to kind of go with him was a bit of a risk, but it paid off. People liked his kind of offbeat sense of humor that he brought to it. I mean, to be honest, I was surprised at how safe he played it, but then I guess, again, they fired Edgar Wright from Ant-Man, so they are still keeping them within their confines.
Perhaps there's a sense of you hire someone like that who hasn't got the reputation behind him to create an ego or to create this sense that they know everything, and so that they will cave into the studio's demands to an extent.
Yeah.
But you want someone creative, but you also want someone who will listen to what you're trying to do with the thing.
There's a lot of that in Hollywood, though, and it seems to be a real problem in a lot of ways at the minute, because there's so many cases where Mark Webb, for example, on the Amazing Spider-Man films, or Josh Trank, who just did the most recent Fantastic Four film. There's a lot of cases where these people have got one or two little indie films under their belt that have wowed people, and then they've been hired, and then the studio execs have come in and told them to do things. They haven't put up enough of a fight. They haven't, they've caved in too much, and then the end result is a bad film, and they get really upset and sort of disown themselves from it. Marvel seem to do that, except the executive producers seem to understand what they're doing enough to, pull it together. And I know they did fall out with Joss Whedon over a few things, and he seemed to leave with them in unhappy terms.
I think Joss Whedon doesn't do what he's told. I think Joss Whedon thinks he knows what he's doing, and fair enough, he's got the reputation to back that up. You hire Joss Whedon and you have to kind of let him do what he wants to an extent.
So how does Jon Favreau fit into that?
He's another case of that. Yeah, he's a director who'd made a few. I mean, he'd started. He'd made Elf at that point and Zathura.
And he'd just done Zathura, which was a bit more of a an actiony.
Zathura has a lot of fans, actually. It's weird. I don't. Have you seen it, either of you?
No.
I don't personally understand the appeal. I think it's kind of like a fairly run-of-the-mill family film. It's not bad, but it's nothing special. But I guess it impressed enough people and showed that he could make something of a reasonable scale. And I do think that had a big part of him getting the gig on Iron Man. But I mean, my understanding with Iron Man as well is that they entered production before the script was even finished. It's one of those cases of having about half a script and just improvising the.
Yeah, from what I was reading, in terms of you were saying it was a gamble, it really felt like this was something where everything just sort of came out right despite all the things that were happening rather than because of them.
Yeah.
Nobody plans to go into production without a script. You're lucky that you've got an actor there who can pull off that improvisational style.
It just happened basically that they'd cast a phenomenal improviser who really embodies the role as well. He's Tony Stark, it would seem, is very much his kind of, Alan Partridge or David Brent persona. It's just a few notches away from the actual him.
While we're talking about casting, just the other people in Iron Man, like I say, I think Terrence Howard, fairly replaceable, as we saw. I think Gwyneth Paltrow doesn't particularly bring anything special to it either.
Oh, do you think?
But,
I disagree with that.
Do you really? See, I've always thought Pepper Potts, just the character.
I mean, not that she did a bad job or anything.
There's nothing wrong with it. It's just
could have been anyone.
Exactly. It's a bland
if you
character.
Put Naomi Watts in that, would it have made any difference?
I don't know. I'm not going to like stand on a soapbox for Gwyneth Paltrow in many films, but in this role with Robert Downey Jr., I think the two of them play off each other very well, and she brings a nice sort of waifishness to it, because she is kind of a wet blanket, really.
I feel like all the supporting characters in Iron Man, to be honest, are very dull. The one exception, he's still quite dull, but the one exception, the one person I feel that can play off Robert Downey Jr. quite effectively is who I think Alan was just building to, which is Jeff Bridges.
Jeff Bridges,
yeah.
Basically what I was going to say, that Jeff Bridges is fantastic in that. I really think that is a really good actor making more of a character than necessarily someone else would have, because there's a certain menace to him, because even with the bald head and all that, he's quite an imposing figure.
Definitely.
But he's very likable at the beginning, and then he kind of turns it and becomes menacing. And there was one scene in particular, he's like berating one of his scientists, the scientist saying, "Oh, we don't know how to do this technology, blah blah blah." And he basically he puts his arm around him and sort of threatens him, but not in a very direct way. But it's just this kind of this imposing presence. It's not even particularly aggressive, but it just harnessed it all.
Yeah.
And that is really great performance. Someone else in that role wouldn't necessarily have brought that to
Yeah, completely agree. I found it really interesting, because I've not revisited this film since I first saw it in 2008, and it was really, I loved coming back to this series when it was all just so sort of simple and uncomplicated, because now I feel like whenever I go and see a Marvel film, I have to think back to, oh god, what is that MacGuffin that was in 2 films ago that I've forgotten about that's now a big deal here, whereas...
Yeah, I mean, I've got to say, I'm a huge fan of these films, and even I, in Captain America Civil War, got to the 50th character being introduced and just kind of thought, oh my god, this, come on. I think it was when Ant-Man showed up, I was like, oh my god, there's still more to come.
That's just it, because now that they've set a precedent for it with the Avengers, which obviously it was a big build-up to that, and now it's impossible for them to really do individual ones anymore, because even in Iron Man 3, you're thinking, well, why isn't Iron Man just calling his mates up? Why isn't he just calling Thor in to sort this out?
I think Iron Man 3 does quite a good job of... I
plucked that one out of thin air. I've not watched it in a while, so maybe they contrive a reason.
Yeah, they make him kind of have to go off the grid, essentially, and that's kind of why he can't. And I think they quite consciously did a decent job of that. I mean, I don't know. I think there's an appetite for... I do wonder when I watch these increasingly huge films. Civil War, the scale of that film is unbelievable, and you do just sit there thinking they can't really go back from this scale, but then people are going to be disappointed. But then you watch something like Ant-Man, and Ant-Man's very small compared to the other films. It's a little heist film about this one guy. There's a quick sequence where he interacts with another Marvel character briefly, and there's a couple of nods and references, but for the most part, it's its own thing, and it was refreshing. Part of why I liked it so much was that it was just this smaller, no pun intended, kind of adventure. And I think Doctor Strange, looking at it, I wouldn't be surprised if it is going to be the same thing, a lot smaller compared to the scale of these films, but distinctly its own thing, because it's going to be magical and cosmic and not just wall-to-wall action fights and brawls.
I think I'd quite like that. It was interesting, actually, again, going back to Iron Man, there isn't actually that much action in it, really, in terms of big action scenes. There's, I think I counted 3. There was, one at the start when he's getting out of that terrorist camp and he's built the suit. And then there's another one later on when he goes back to take out some terrorists in the Middle East. And then there's another big action scene at the end with Jeff Bridges. But apart from those, there are little bits peppered throughout. But
even that bit at the end with Jeff Bridges, it's a fairly low-key action sequence for a superhero film. It's not it's not.
Yeah, it all sort of takes place in one little spot.
Yeah.
And they don't knock down any skyscrapers.
No.
Yeah.
It's like, it's just sort of one building and then the outside of it. It just looks like it was filmed on some street in Toronto or something. Like, whereas now they're like, it's not a superhero film unless they like total a city.
For me, watching Iron Man, and I did enjoy it. The reason I think I did is because of some of those elements. I'm not really interested in big, overblown action sequences. And to be honest, even the end of Iron Man, I was just like, okay, get on with it.
Yeah.
I mean, outright, we haven't really covered. I mean, we clearly all like the film, but what are your thoughts on the film Iron Man? Calvin, I suppose you go first.
Well, like I said, I was really happy to come back to it and revisit it because I actually enjoyed it a lot more than what my memory
well, I was going to ask what you thought of it when you saw it the first time. I mean,
I think when I first saw it, like, I saw it on the exact same day as Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, so I wasn't necessarily in the best of moods when I saw it. And I think it was sort of, I thought it was fine. I think at the time I didn't really appreciate Robert Downey Jr. as much as I probably do now, and sort of that he is just a very different kind of superhero compared to even the other ones in the Marvel. Like, Thor can be quite po-faced, and so can Captain America, whereas Tony Stark, Robert Downey Jr.
It's ironic
really
that, isn't
character.
it, given how close he is to Batman, that he's sort of worlds apart from Batman at the same time.
It is crazy, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's because the motivation's completely different, isn't it?
But that's it. Superficially, they're the same character. In fact, that's
actually,
why Jarvis, the AI inside his suit, is just that. In the comics, Jarvis is a butler. But they, when they were adapting it to film, they were like, yeah, this is too much like Alfred. People are going to take the piss. We better do something about it.
Yeah. I'll probably revisit it again, to be honest. And maybe I'll revisit all of Phase 1 because, like I said, I've been keeping up with the Marvel films and I watch them whenever they come out in the cinema, but now they're just so bloated and I just roll my eyes and it's just non-stop, like, people nudging each other in the ribs and making a reference to something from 5 films ago that I can't remember. And I more wish that they were just sort of more standalone films like this instead of being these massive team-ups all the time.
I mean, I don't know. I think there's something to be said for. I like the idea. I like what they seem to be doing now, which is kind of teaming up but scaling it back a bit. The upcoming Thor Ragnarok, the third Thor film, I can't wait for because it's basically a Thor Incredible Hulk buddy cop movie without the cops, road trip kind of thing. But that's great because I was saying for a while, like, well, where do they go from here? Well, I guess you just kind of pick 2 of them and do a crossover with 2 of them and focus on that, and because then you get the interplay between the 2 characters, which is kind of why people like these crossover events, but you don't have to worry about it being absolutely humongous on massive scales. And I like that they seem to be moving in that direction a bit.
So Alan, you really liked Iron Man then, I take it?
I did, yeah. I mean, I don't want to overdo it. But for a genre that doesn't particularly strike me that strongly much, it was a good example. Yeah, I really liked the character. Obviously, Robert Downey Jr. in it, and I remember actually seeing it might have been Iron Man 2, maybe even 3, where it starts to grate on me after a while. That's kind of smug, little witty asides all the time. But in one film, it works.
I must admit, it feels a lot more authentic in this one as well. Like, he has these little witty comments and sarcastic bits under his breath in this film, but they feel, for the most part, like off-the-cuff remarks, whereas I do notice them now. Every time Tony Stark shows up in a film, it feels like 5 writers have banged their head against the wall, figuring out the perfect one-liner for Iron Man to have. And it just never quite feels as... I don't know, it just feels a bit too try-hard now. I don't suppose either of you have read any of the comics at any point ever, have you?
Never. No.
I've read the first few Iron Man issues, or rather, I think it's called Spectacular Tales or something. You know, Iron
so
Man
the first proper 60s or whenever it was.
Yeah, and.
Spectacular Tales of the Iron Man.
Obviously, it's not the conflict in the Middle East that they play off of in the original comics because they came out in the 60s. It's Vietnam. He's captured by the Viet Cong and held prisoner, and it's essentially the same, but just a different bunch of villains. But it is interesting because there are all these little elements that just don't make any sense anymore. Like, his suit is like a tank. It's ridiculous how it's designed. It's so like massive, and I mean it's kind of like his first Mark suit that he uses to escape, I suppose, but he never then refines it and slims it down afterwards. But the other thing is that he has to charge it up every like few hours because it'll drain its battery. So, and he keeps it in a suitcase, which is something they like did bring in the second film, and it was stupid. But because back in the 60s you like had to have a secret identity and keep it secret, he'd walk around with a suitcase, pull out the like fabric metal Iron Man suit that would then become rock hard, plug it into the wall, charge it up, and then he'd like have a few hours and be, you know, whenever the plot found it convenient, it'd be like, oh no, my battery's running low. And it was just there's all these like rules and bits of baggage, and I do really like that they just threw them out the window with this, down to the ending, you know, the iconic ending where they just have him completely discard the alter ego. And I mean, that was a big decision for them to take as a franchise back then. That wasn't really something that superhero films did, but it's something that the Marvel cinematic universe has championed and is increasingly more prevalent. I mean, a similar thing in the comics, Thor in the 60s was a crippled man who is in love with his nurse and like picks up the hammer and then like taps it on the ground and turns into Thor and keeps it a secret from everyone. And you know, again, they just completely threw that out the window and were like, well, that's a load of nonsense, let's just have him be Thor the whole time. Like,
I like that though. I do like that. And particularly in Iron Man, it's the perfect ending, isn't it? Because it fits the character so well that he's going to go up there and go, yeah, I'm fucking Iron Man. Like it just absolutely works. And it's a great ending. It's a real great punch.
And it's a shame they just dealt with it so poorly in the sequels.
One thing that I think didn't work for me in the film at all, and I think it's interesting that we've been talking for an hour about this and none of us have mentioned it at all. There's a whole love story subplot with him and Potts, which is just like, it feels so unnecessary.
I hate the romance between those two, to be honest. That's something. That's my biggest gripe with the Marvel Cinematic Universe as a whole, to be honest, is it just, for all their steps forward and like being like, okay, we don't need this like convention here, we can step away from that. They're still so shackled to this bullshit. There has to be a romantic interest crowbarred into the film so that they can like kiss them and then go off into the final battle. And Iron Man certainly isn't the worst. I think the worst one is the most recent Captain America film, which just fucking pisses me off because, like, you know, they've spent 2 films and a TV series establishing Peggy Carter, and obviously she's all old and that, but do you need to crowbar in an 80th character just so that like Captain America can kiss them and then go off and like after they've spent 10 minutes together? It's fucking nonsense. And
there's so much more than that between Tony Stark.
I agree. Iron Man is the least bad of the lot of them. Not that bad. But I hate it. I hate that Thor has to have Jane and then like she's not even going to be in any more films, and it's like, well, what was the fucking point in just having Natalie Portman sitting there clearly like pissed off to be involved in the film for whatever reason? Like, just
I don't know why she even signs on to big budget movies. No. She just doesn't like any of them. She hated Star Wars. I don't know.
And yeah, I mean, Gwyneth Paltrow and Robert Downey
Well, it might
Jr.
be the paycheck.
That's true.
That might be why.
Iron Man, Pepper Potts, they are like, yeah, it's the best example of it working in the universe, and it's still not something
I would have preferred. Yeah. I think I would have liked it. Like, you see it in, say, Spider-Man. He's a teenager.
Spider-Man is fine.
So the fact that he's really in love with this girl.
Yeah, if we're stepping outside of the Marvel Cinematic Universe and including the other things, Spider-Man, I'm all for it being about romance, because it's meant to be a story about this, you know, teenager dealing with high school drama, and then he's also a superhero, and that means that he has to worry about getting his homework on time after he's, you know, defeated a supervillain. It's that sort of nonsense, and it makes perfect sense that he's dealing with all these romantic issues. And you know, I feel like the films, even the shitty Amazing Spider-Man films, do a pretty good job of, him and his relationship with the likes of Mary Jane and the other one.
But over 20-year-olds aren't allowed to have relationships. Is that your argument here?
No, it's just that they don't develop them particularly well. The chemistry in The Amazing Spider-Man between Emma Stone and Andrew Garfield is great, and they were a couple in real life, weren't they? I don't know if that came before or after, but they have a phenomenal chemistry in that film. And it works. I think that Gwyneth and Robert Downey Jr. do surprisingly for her. Really? Because on paper I wouldn't put her in this kind of role, but I think their little.
I feel like she's doing her best.
I think she keeps up with him pretty well.
To me, it just feels like she feels like the sort of secretary that he flirts with, and it just doesn't quite.
She's Miss Moneypenny, really, isn't she?
Yeah, but imagine if Bond and Moneypenny got together. And
that's what I mean.
It's
the boss with the secretary, and if they ever actually left their wife for them instead of just shagging them, then the whole thing would fall apart because they haven't got anything to hold them together. I don't know. It just doesn't work for me at all. I think he has more of an interesting relationship with pretty much everyone else they've paired him with. It's more interesting to watch him chat with Jeff Bridges or that little kid in Iron Man 3.
You can't say it's more exciting to watch him chat with Terrence Howard.
I'd put her on the same level as Terrence Howard, to be perfectly honest.
No.
For kind of stilted, these guys are meant to be close, but it doesn't really feel like they are kind of conversation. Yeah, it doesn't work for me at all.
I think it could have been done better in Iron Man and involved him because Tony Stark is at a point where he's lived this playboy lifestyle and he's at an age and he's obviously going through this huge sort of traumatic incident. He's at an age where he might go, oh my God, what am I doing? What am I leaving behind me? Am I going to have a legacy? Do I want to have kids? And all that sort of stuff. And we never really see any of that. It's just like...
Well, it's annoying as well because that's clearly the idea behind it, but they just don't convey it very well. And I think what really annoys me with it is that these films are they're not willing to let the romance evolve over the course of the films, despite the fact that they're building these hugely interconnected narratives. They could have happily had the Pepper Potts thing run throughout the 3 films as a kind of will they, won't they almost. And I think it would have been better for it. But instead, they kind of basically have this romance in the first film, and then they have to kind of put the romance in jeopardy in the second film, but then kind of have them make up again. And then they have to do it again with the third film. And it just feels a bit like, oh, come on. Whereas if they'd spent a bit of time, I don't know, developing it a bit more, I'd probably be more open to it. But yeah,
this will come back in my pitch. Before we get onto the pictures, there's just one more thing as well that I think we should talk about, and it's the Stan Lee cameo.
I forgot what he even does in the first Iron Man. What does he do?
This is my favourite Stan Lee cameo ever, definitely.
Remind me what he does in this one?
Robert Downey Jr. is turning up some event, and there's an old man there with some naked ladies, and he pats him on the back and says, "How's it going, Hef?" And then he turns around to the camera, and it's just Stan Lee sort of mugging at the camera for
wait, what?
A good few seconds.
Doesn't he do that? Isn't that what they do in the second one?
No, in the second one, he's Larry King.
Oh, yeah.
And then I loved the idea that if Jon Favreau had kept on doing these, Stan Lee would have just turned up as old men.
Those Stan Lee cameos feel like a real hangover from the past now as well. Every time I watch one of these films, it'll be 2 hours into this relentless slog of just 20 different heroes pounding each other into a wall, and then it'll just cut to Stan Lee gurning, and you'll just sort of be like, oh yeah, that's something they still do. I forgot about that.
Yeah. I think some of his worst ones are the ones where they give him lines
Spider-Man 3.
Oh, I was thinking the second Fantastic Four film with the original ones where he's trying to get into the wedding of Mr. Fantastic, and he's no, I'm Stan Lee. I'm Stan Lee. I'm on the guest list. And it's what on earth is this? What does he do in Spider-Man 3? I can't remember.
Oh, it's the worst one. I mean, I'm a Spider-Man 3 apologist, and even I can't defend the sequence in which Spider-Man's I think he's looking at a poster of something and he's feeling a bit down, and then Stan Lee walks over and just sort of says, no matter what, someone always loves you. It's some sort of weird he has this whole speech with him.
I know it. That's the...
Are you thinking of Mallrats?
yeah, it's basically, yeah.
No, that's the one where he says, is it sometimes one person can make a difference. Is that one?
I think it is, and that's in like such. You compare that to the first Spider-Man film, in which it's a blink and miss it shot where he appears.
That's what they used to be, isn't it?
Yeah, he's an extra in the first film. Like, there's a big bit of a building falling down, and it nearly crushes a guy, and I think he pushes a kid out of the way or something, but it is less than a second that he appears. And I kind of feel that's how it should be. I don't like it when they like give him because now he appears, but then he gets like a kind of gag with it, and it's always just like, oh, come on.
Well, that's why the Hefner
one's fine. Yeah,
he didn't have to act.
The Hefner one's like
and
a
it was
decent
just like a
joke,
little passing
but
guy.
Yeah,
like God, it's it's when they call too much attention to him. It's one of those things that just completely takes me out of the world, and not in a good way.
Yeah, that's the thing, because for a while it was sort of, I think people maybe looked forward to it or thought it was cute, and now it's just like, no one actually really, it's just so overdone that no one really cares. Okay, so Alan, what's your pitch?
The principle of my pitch, the sort of the simple premise that it all sort of boils down to, is a matter of casting. And I'm just curious as to with Iron Man, it's directed by Jon Favreau. You need a lead.
Are you going to put Vince Vaughn
charming,
in the film?
erudite?
Oh, God.
Why isn't Vince Vaughn Tony Stark?
Oh.
So, I just wanted to analyse this a little bit. How would it be different if Vince Vaughn was cast as Tony Stark? And let's just let's just think about it for a second, because it must have been considered as a legitimate thing. There's no way, in 2008, Jon Favreau is making a film. Vince Vaughn would have been the right age. He's the right kind of personality for the character. It must have at least been thought about by someone.
You're probably right.
How in shape is Vince Vaughn?
The suit's all CG.
But he's a big lad.
A big lad. Sounds like he's from Yorkshire.
Yeah, well, if he wanted to bulk up, it wouldn't be like out of the question. And when he is skinny, like he can be skinny. He has got the capacity to do it if you see him in the mid-90s. So, okay, so I wanted to sort of think, how would you, we appreciate that Iron Man is so dependent on Robert Downey Jr. now. So how would it be very different if you'd put Vince Vaughn in that role?
I think it just wouldn't be as good, to be honest.
Probably.
I think it'd be pretty much the same thing, but just not as good.
Well, in the spirit of writing the script on the fly, I just sort of I went through the basic story and then just changed things to make it fit what my new Vaughn-centric idea. But I decided to change the rest of the cast as well, just while I was doing it. All right, first of all, you need to Jon Favreau's chauffeur. You need to bump that role up a bit. You need to have them together more, a bit of
he's
buddy cop kind of banter, comedy duo banter.
He's coming. He's got a role in the new Spider-Man film they're making.
Oh,
apparently.
Oh, as
Jon
that character.
Favreau's character.
Oh wow.
Yeah. Huh. I think Tony Stark's in it as well. My guess is that they decide they could afford to pay for one scene with Tony Stark and have him kind of say, well, if you need anything, speak to my right-hand man here, and then Jon Favreau can kind of do all of the other stuff they need a lot more cheaply.
Yep, you're right. That'll be it.
Yeah.
Okay, so I want to recast Pepper Potts. I want Heather Graham.
Okay.
Just because I prefer Heather Graham to Gwyneth Paltrow. I don't think she'd be any better, to be honest. But I think she would riff with Vince Vaughn better. I did think if I had to recast Obadiah Stane, as I say, I think Jeff Bridges does a fantastic job. I'd probably go with Paul Giamatti.
Ah,
I don't know. It just seems like he would fit. He was also in Big Mama's House as well as Terrence Howard. So, I decided that instead of having Terrence Howard or Don Cheadle for that matter, have someone who's less, anonymous, can have a bit more of a character. So I've gone with Queen Latifah.
Perfect.
Especially in 2008, she was at the peak of the game, and I think you definitely get a bit more sass out of Queen Latifah. You get a lot more out of their relationship. So the whole script is, retooled to involve more witty banter. And so in the first scenes where he's captive in the caves, the old fella, the old Jensen, I think his name was Jensen, he's a bit too boring for this new type of film. So I've decided instead to make him like a young techno wunderkind who be played by Aziz Ansari.
Another brilliant choice.
He's just like this technical whiz kid.
Yeah.
And then instead of him dying and you know all that during the escape, he'll escape with Tony Stark and then become like his little sidekick. And I thought it'd be quite good if he was called Aluminum Boy.
Aluminum Boy.
So it'd be Iron Man and Aluminum Boy.
Oh, I love that.
I think sidekicks have been largely forgotten in this new generation of superheroes.
Yeah, you're quite right. Yeah.
And I think that'll bring them back in. Okay, I'll keep going. So he creates this suit to get out of captivity, all that. But instead of, as we see in the film, you know, becoming this... Well, like I say, he doesn't do anything, does he, really? He just ends up fighting over the suit. And so, what if he was fighting petty crime? That's what I'd have him do. And it's basically... You'd have to have him like... He watches RoboCop on the TV and he's like, oh my God, that's what I should be doing with the suit. I become RoboCop. And so he goes out on the streets and like of an evening and starts like stopping petty crime with this, you know, hugely overpowered suit. And then in the meantime, you got Queen Latifah. She's trying to get him to sell it to the military, or you know, give it to the military, or develop it with the military, however they work that contract. And then you've got Stain, Paul Giamatti, he's trying to use it for evil. So like he wants to sell it to the Chinese government, who we all know are evil. So that's why he's getting torn between these two factors. Oh yeah, so you do the whole thing where, you know, Stain is trying to reverse engineer the technology. He can't figure it out. So he kidnaps Pepper Potts in order to force Stark to give him all the information about the arc reactor. But Tony Stark at the time is in Vegas with Jon Favreau at the time. And they, you know, he's just basically in a drunk and drugged stupor. So he can't help. So in his absence, Aluminum Boy goes to try and rescue her, only to be easily beaten because his armor is made of aluminium foil. And he doesn't actually have any skills whatsoever. So he just sort of like beats him quite easily. But then once he's got Aluminum Boy or Yinsen access to him, Stain uses him to get into the computer system, whatever he needs to get to the arc reactor technology, blah blah blah. And then he's got it. So then he's got the suit. He's got the Ironmonger suit that he can create and he can power it. And I thought, you know, if you want to have the love subplot in it, you have it between Jensen and Potts at this point, rather than with Potts and Stark, because that didn't work for me. So if you have to have that, put Jensen in there with her, because then they're in captivity together. Or
well, I think that's quite interesting actually, because I think in the comics, Pepper was going out with the Jon Favreau character, wasn't she? What's his name? Happy
Hogan.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting. Stark eventually, you know, wakes up from his drunken coma, finds out what's going on, and so he suits up to go and fight Obadiah Stane. And he arrives at the Stark headquarters, but he doesn't find like this giant ironmonger thing trying to kill him. He finds Obadiah Stane just sat in his office, and he's not wearing any armor. He's not ready to fight. But obviously, he's a middle-aged, physically unfit, you know, very wealthy man. He's not going to get into a giant iron suit and fight someone. It's a ridiculous idea. And then he just tells Stark that, you know, he's already sent all the information to the Chinese. It's all bought and paid for. Job's done. He's too late. There's no fight to be had.
No.
But they are incredibly rich. And so, robbed of his climactic battle, Stark just goes to a diner with Jon Favreau. They have a kebab. And, you know, they just take solace in the fact that he's one of the richest people on Earth. And then,
kebab, you say?
Yes.
Or a
shawarma. And then the post-credit scene is like a Chinese factory where all these Iron Man suits are just coming on a conveyor belt. There's just one after the other, after the other, after the other. And that sets up a sequel, of course. I kind of just started with a joke idea of putting Vince Vaughn in it, and I didn't really know where to go with it. So it just kind of it wandered to a close. but so I'm not really sure what point I was trying to make. But I did like the idea of giving him a sidekick. So I thought that was quite cool.
I feel like we've quite firmly established our defaults at this point, and when we can't think of anything, Calvin does a James Bond crossover. I just do Toy Story 2, and you just put Vince Vaughn in it, remake it with Vince Vaughn.
I agree, but in this case it did come from the source because
no, it's a good point. You're right, because
at the time,
you're right that must have been considered. His headshot must have been up on a wall somewhere.
Exactly. Yeah, I did almost put like Will Ferrell as Obadiah Stane, Owen Wilson as Pepper Potts, all that sort of thing. But didn't go that far.
Well, you'll be happy to know that this pitch does not, in fact, involve James Bond. So, do you guys remember a show that was on in the 90s? Actually, I mean, we were probably all too young to actually watch
Beavis
it.
and Butthead.
No, it was called Lois and Clark. The New Adventures of Superman.
Yeah.
Do I remember it? The New Adventures of Superman, whatever it was called. Yeah. That was basically my main source of Superman.
Oh.
Because that's what I used to watch. Like the films, I've watched them and never got into them. That series I used to watch when I was like a teenager.
Oh, wow.
So it used to be on like after school.
It was certainly my first introduction to Superman in any real capacity, but it was always a very passive. The Simpsons isn't on for another half an hour or whatever. I'll just see the end of this. And then,
Like, I had vague memories of it growing up. I think my dad might have watched it or something, but I went back to a couple of... I didn't watch any full episodes, but I went and saw some clips on YouTube, and it kind of fascinates me how it does make sense in a way that it does try to straddle... It tries to appeal to both genders with... half of it being Superman fighting supervillains and whatever, and the other half is Terry Hatcher engaging in these almost like soap opera like work conflicts. And there's one clip that I saw where she's like brawling with some woman she's had a dispute with, and then they fall in a massive wedding cake, and they start fighting in the cake, and it's like Desperate Housewives or something like that. It's quite amazing that such a thing was even made. I kind of appreciate the idea in theory of making it more of a like the whole show was Lois and Clark, not Clark and Lois, and it's as much about their relationship as it is Superman's fighting evil. For me, my favorite thing in Iron Man was Pepper and Tony and their interaction, so to be honest, I would rather see a lot more of that showcased in future installments. So my pitch is Pepper and Tony, The New Adventures of Iron Man, as a TV series. Starring...
Okay, now, starring, because you can't have Hollywood stars.
I would.
Like, Dean Cain and Terry Hatcher are not Hollywood stars in the mid-90s. You need TV fodder here.
It only works with Gwyneth Paltrow and Robert Downey Jr. Let's pretend we live in a world where Iron Man was not terribly successful, but maybe a portion of the population really loved their relationship and wanted to see more. So the first season of I've only really got like a very bare basic, like it'd pick up sort of right after the end of the film, and the first season would largely revolve around, okay, so I need casting ideas for this because I want to have Obadiah Stane's son. Obadiah Stane is dead and
Jonah
his
Hill.
son has inherited. Oh, yes, that'd be good. So the new Stane Jr. is going to be the new villain, and he's going to be involved in the company, like trying to take it down while also being involved in nefarious villain schemes. I think Jonah Hill would be pretty perfect. Do you think he'd shave his head?
Yeah, definitely.
So
he did all sorts of weird shit for The Wolf of Wall Street, didn't he? Like fucking around with his teeth and stuff.
Fixed.
Yeah.
Oh, huh.
I guess that was a Martin Scorsese film, so he might have been more willing to.
So I'm gonna have Rhodey in the main cast as well, but I want him to be played by a different African American actor every 2 or 3 episodes, inexplicably, and then maybe by the end of the first season we just cast like an Asian American actor in the role instead, and that's it. It's permanent. So the arc of the series would be Jeff Bridges' son trying to take over the company, and there's villainous things episode to episode, but the main thing would be focused on the relationship between Pepper and Tony, and they're not quite together at the start of the thing, so that maybe they're dating other people, and then they come together at the end of the first season. But yeah, I just want an excuse to see more of those two just bantering and twittering with each other.
Okay.
Twittering?
Yeah.
Sorry, I thought that...
On Twitter?
Do you mean twittering like just chatting? Or do you mean twittering?
Yes,
okay.
I meant twittering in the very old-fashioned way of... Yes. I didn't mean that I wanted to see them just sat like on their phones, like
on the sofa with each other, not speaking.
Yeah. So that's my pitch.
I remember the opening sequence was Superman flying around in space with her, and it always really like upset me as a kid because I was like, why can she breathe in space? And I remember my mum saying, because his cape's magic and it lets her breathe. But in hindsight, I think it was probably just meant to be a night sky.
Oh dear.
Oh, just imagine your mum just going, it's magic cake or something.
Sol, what's your pitch?
So I had a very, very difficult time coming up with revisionist sequel ideas for this because even in 2008 when I went to watch it, I knew they were building towards this Avengers film. So there was never like a point where I kind of knew Iron Man as its own thing, and I had a very difficult time like trying to think of what I would do that isn't just, well, we do the Incredible Hulk and then we do Thor and Captain America and then the Avengers. So I've tried to like imagine that a world in which that never happened and I'd never been exposed to the idea of cinematic universes. So that would follow on from the rules and the conventions, I suppose, of the superhero genre prior to the release of Iron Man. To me, the biggest weakness of the first Iron Man kind of is the lack of a really good villain for him to bounce off of. I think, I like Jeff Bridges and everything, but I do think that character doesn't quite play as well as it might. They basically did this thing that a lot of superhero films do in their first installment, which is to pair up the hero with a villain who's essentially the same thing but evil. Like the Incredible Hulk, the Ed Norton film, he goes up against the Abomination, which is someone who's had the exact same gamma radiation treatment pretty much. Thor obviously deals with Loki, who's another Asgardian super being. Batman Begins deals with him up against Ra's al Ghul, another guy who's had all these bits of training. Ant-Man has Yellowcoat. The Amazing Spider-Man put him up against the Lizard, which is a guy who's, for all intents and purposes, bitten by a radioactive lizard. And Iron Man puts him up against Ironmonger, Obadiah Stane. It's just another guy in a big iron suit. What they seem to do then is to kind of invert that for the sequel and pair them up with the opposite, their kind of antithesis character. And again, all these characters have these complete, polar opposites. Superman being Lex Luthor, Batman's being the Joker. Even again, Hulk sets up a villain in that film called the Leader, who is a guy who has the same like gamma radiation stuff, but it like drips into his head and makes him like super intelligent, and I think he probably has some psychic powers, but essentially it's mind over brain versus brawn.
Is that in one of the films?
It's set up in the first Incredible Hulk, but they never do anything with it. It's just a little shot setting up a sequel that is yet to be made.
Is it Tim Blake Nelson?
Yes.
Oh yeah, I forgot about that.
Yeah, and if you don't know about the character, it's just this really like what the fuck scene where like some green stuff drips in his head and it goes all bubbly.
Well, yeah, it's obviously setting it up
Yeah.
for something that never happened.
Yeah, are you guys familiar with the Mandarin? I'm sure you are from Iron Man 3. I'm assuming you've both seen it.
Mm-hmm.
I'm more familiar with him because there was a lot of there was quite aggressive backlash, wasn't there, out of his portrayal, to the extent that I think they had to make like a short film to sort of retcon.
Yeah.
But I've not seen it, so I don't really know.
I mean, I won't go into it in too much detail because we'll no doubt get to the Iron Man sequels there, but Iron Man's like arch nemesis is the Mandarin, as far as I'm aware, and he is essentially a magician, and they do kind of hint at him in the first Iron Man film. He has these magic rings that he draws his energy from, and I think the terrorist organization that kidnap him in Iron Man are called like the Order of the Ten Rings or something. One of them's got a few rings with some symbols on. There's a few hints that they're like building towards this character. I was sort of thinking, well, I'd have the Mandarin, I guess, bring his arch nemesis in, play him up as an anti, like the opposite. So it's kind of like technology versus magic. They're kind of opposites. But then I thought about it and I was like, no, actually, they're not opposites at all. Therefore, it can't be the Mandarin. And I went on a bit of a research mission to find the true antithesis to Iron Man, the true mirror character, I guess, the opposite of him.
Is it like an Amish guy?
No, but that would have been brilliant.
Straw Man.
No, I looked into it, and there's a villain called Plant Man.
No.
Plant Man?
in Iron Man?
No, or... in Marvel's universe. And he's got a history with Iron Man, actually.
Oh, but who like, does he come out of any particular superheroes, like, comic book, or?
I think his first story was a Fantastic Four story, but I couldn't really figure it out reading about it.
Do they really just sort of flip villains from, like, one series to another? Like,
yeah.
Is that a done thing? Oh, wow, I didn't realise that.
Yeah.
I thought it was very much a, like, that villain is for that, Dr. Octopus is not going to be in whatever else, Marvel own.
I don't know, I guess once you've established the shared universe, you can do it.
Yeah, that's true, yeah.
The likes of Dr. Octopus has more of a personal relationship with Spider-Man, but yeah, they wouldn't hesitate to bring him into a story with Fantastic Four or X-Men or something. They do stuff like that all the time. In fact, I mean, you can see it a bit just in, like, people not being quite sure what film franchise gets what villains at times. The Kingpin character, who is the villain in the Ben Affleck Daredevil.
Ah, yes.
I'm pretty sure he was, like, one of the big villains in one of the Spider-Man cartoons back in the 90s, and a lot of people were kind of like, oh, isn't that a Spider-Man guy? But anyway, this guy, he was a lab assistant of a famous botanist researching the intelligence of plant life.
Right.
After his mentor dies, he tries to continue his work and invents a device that allows him to communicate with plants. He's laughed out of the scientific community and is left only being able to find work as a gardener. He uses his veggie ray, that's what they call it, to control and animate plant life and to disguise himself as Plant Man in order to get revenge on his former employers. Then at one point he did have a spat with Iron Man, apparently, because he thinks that he's killed Tony Stark for some reason, and then decides to try and take over the world, and then Iron Man foils him because he obviously hasn't actually killed him. He's a British guy and he looks like a tree.
He's British?
Yeah, apparently. I forgot to mention he's from London. But I just figured, I'll put him in as the villain, and that's your sequel. But I've got some casting ideas.
Is he like I say, if he's like a proper Cockney, you go like Vinnie Jones.
Well, he was a lab assistant.
Oh, mate, I'm a fucking plant man, aren't I?
So yeah, I mean, who would you cast as Plant Man? Either of you, off the top of your head. You need a Brit who's going up against Robert Downey Jr. That's how you want to approach it.
Benedict Cumberbatch.
Oh yeah, that'd work. That'd be quite good.
I'd go with Toby Jones.
Yeah.
Because I would go totally different to Robert Downey Jr. You want to go something.
I was thinking about it. The best person I could think of would be Peter Capaldi. I like the idea of him. I think he could stand his ground against Robert Downey Jr. They're not completely like different in terms of age, even though one of them looks a lot more Hollywood, obviously. It'd be nice to have a kind of aggressive, sweary Scottish tree up against Iron Man. So that's my that's all I've got, I'm afraid.
What he's a tree?
Yeah, he's a tree. He's a plant man.
But he is a plant. He is a tree.
Yeah, does he look like them trees from Lord of the Rings?
Yeah. He uses the veggie ray on himself to make himself look like a tree man. And yeah, he looks like one of those human-sized version. Do you know what the title of the film would be as well?
What?
It would be... No, I don't know.
It'd be Iron Man 2, stark contrast.
Oh, I like that. That's good.
Very nice.
So, yeah.
Brilliant.
But ultimately, I'm glad that we got the Avengers instead. So,
well, you never know. They're going to keep on churning out these Marvel films. Maybe Plant Man will make an appearance somewhere down the line.
I'm more excited for them to get to the Condiment King and the Batman universe, to be honest.
Can't wait. But much like with Batman, Batman and Condiment King, the DC movie series can't catch up with where the Marvel series is at. Oh, that was a very long sentence for that, wasn't it? Oh.
God.
What else does he say? He's like, rubbing salt in your wounds, Batman.
Something about relishing the moment.
Yes. You don't cut the mustard.
I think that's probably it, to be honest. I think they kind of use all the puns they've got and then get rid of him.
I'm trying to make a pun out of horseradish.
Interesting.
Mayonnaise.
Who's the villain in Doctor Strange? Oh, it's Tilda Swinton, isn't it? Yes.
Is she the villain?
Oh, I thought she was.
Was that is the character of Tilda Swinton playing? Or someone's playing Tilda Swinton?
I haven't watched any of the trailers because I...
Oh, really?
Yeah, well, I typically avoid trailers these days. If it's something that I'm definitely going to go and see anyway, I'll typically avoid the trailers unless it's like something that I'm really like so excited about that I can't like not watch the trailer.
What's an example of something you're really excited about?
New Evil Dead. If they made a Futurama movie,
this is all hypothetical, isn't it?
Maybe the Book of Mormon movie, when that comes around, I might check out that trailer. I'll often check out a trailer if it's kind of like I have no idea what this film's going to be like, and it might help me kind of gauge the reaction a bit. But if it's, like I say, if it's something I'm sold on already, typically I avoid the trailer and just end up seeing it at the cinema now.
Would you ever sort of, for example, stay up until 1 o'clock in the morning because that's when the trailer is going to be released on the website, and you want to see if Christoph Waltz is in it?
No.
Did you ever do that?
That's a bit sad, isn't it?
That's a bit sad, yeah.
Oh. I had espresso martinis to keep me up through the night when the Spectre trailer was released.
Oh, is that Christoph Waltz's silhouette? I'd like to know what it's like to be excited about something.
Oh.
Oh, God.
Oh.
You know Doctor Strange, actually? I don't know who the villain is. I think Tilda Swinton is like a mentor Yoda figure. She might be a villain, like secretly, but I certainly don't think that's the... But I'm really looking forward to Doctor Strange because I think it will be a nice change of pace for that universe. It's going to introduce a slightly different side of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And more than anything, apparently they've just brought Dan Harmon on board to rewrite the script. Or rather to write additional sequences for it. And that's really weird because he writes comedy and I don't think he's got any experience on a film of this scale. But that'll be the Russo brothers, no doubt, who've been like, hey, you should get this guy on board from Community. Anyway, that concludes another successful round of Diminishing Returns. A few notes on today's episode. Earlier on in the episode, I talked about the Johnny Depp reference in The Ultimates. I've since remembered that he wasn't included in the casting discussion. It was more that they just made fun of his drug habit as a throwaway gag. Also, I referred to Ant-Man's villain as a yellow coat rather than yellow jacket. Sorry about that, guys. As always, please rate and review us, like us on Facebook, all of that stuff, and do come back next week because it's gonna be bloody brilliant. Thank you, bye.